A chilling utterance. A simple phrase, whispered in fear, or perhaps in a more sinister deceit. In the depths of winter, 1692, in the harsh, isolated landscape of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, such words held a terrifying, undeniable power. They were the declarations of the afflicted, and they would shatter a community, ignite a reign of terror, and forever stain the history of justice itself. The Salem Witch Trials, a name synonymous with fanaticism and a profound miscarriage of justice. But how did a legal system, ostensibly built on divine law, become the very instrument of its community's destruction? This is the meticulously reconstructed story of how fear became evidence, how suspicion quickly transformed into conviction, and how the terrifying power of an accusation became an undeniable death sentence. Our journey begins in the desolate, snow-laden Massachusetts Bay Colony. The year is 1692. This was a place forged in the crucible of unwavering faith and unrelenting hardship. The Puritan settlers sought to establish a city upon a hill, yet this was overshadowed by the brutal realities of survival. Life in Salem Village was relentlessly stark. Every setback, a blighted crop, the sickness of a child, the unforgiving grip of winter, was interpreted not merely as misfortune, but as a direct test of divine will, or, more chillingly, as the tangible evidence of the devil's active, malevolent hand. Puritan theology was absolute. Satan was not an abstract concept. He was an ever-present enemy working to corrupt souls. This fostered an atmosphere of constant vigilance, suspicion, and a pervasive dread of hidden evil. Deep divisions ran through the community. There was the thriving, wealthy Salem town, a port city, and our focus, the more agrarian, isolated, and economically struggling Salem Village. The village deeply resented the town's prosperity and the heavy taxes. Within Salem Village itself, bitter land disputes, feuds over church leadership, and personal grudges had been simmering for decades. Families held generations-long animosities, creating powerful, distrustful factions. The stage was meticulously set. The kindling was dry, brittle, and abundant. It was merely awaiting a spark. That fateful spark ignited in the parsonage of Reverend Samuel Parris. In January 1692, Reverend Parris's own 9-year-old daughter, Betty, and his orphaned niece, 11-year-old Abigail Williams, began to exhibit profoundly alarming symptoms. They suffered violent, uncontrollable fits. Their small bodies would contort into unnatural postures, their limbs flailing as if unseen forces were pulling at them. They complained incessantly of invisible torments, pinching, biting, and the terrifying sensation of choking. The local physician, Dr. William Griggs, was swiftly summoned. After diligently examining the girls, meticulously searching for any physical ailment, he found absolutely nothing. With a grim and heavy heart, Dr. Griggs delivered a chilling and utterly unequivocal diagnosis. The girls were under an evil hand. They were bewitched. This pronouncement, coming from a man of science, carried immense weight. The devil was indeed amongst them, actively working through human agents to corrupt and destroy. The terrifying search for the evil hand began in earnest. Under immense pressure, the afflicted girls finally named their tormentors. The accusations landed first on society's most vulnerable, its most marginalized, its most easily condemned. First, there was Tituba, the enslaved woman of Reverend Parris. Her unfamiliar ethnicity, her practice of folk magic, and her perceived outsider status made her an immediate and potent target for suspicion. Next, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, impoverished and destitute, known for muttering curses under her breath when charity was denied her. She epitomized the socially despised outcast. And finally, Sarah Osborne, an elderly, infirm woman who rarely attended church and who had previously been embroiled in a scandalous legal dispute. She existed on the fringes of acceptable society. These three women represented everything the Puritan community most feared and silently despised in its outcasts. Their initial arrest marked the formal beginning of the infamous and utterly devastating Salem Witch Trials. This was no minor legal dispute. For the fervent Puritans, witchcraft was an act of profound treason against God himself, punishable by death both under English law and biblical scripture. The accused faced not only earthly execution, but the eternal damnation of their immortal souls. The stakes were absolute: the purity of their faith, the safety of their children, and the very destiny of their nascent sacred colony. The formal legal process, brutal and unyielding, was now fully engaged. The path into the complex, bewildering depths of the legal labyrinth of Salem was now wide open. The true, terrifying crisis began the moment the accusations moved from the afflicted girl's private terror to the magistrate's public inquiry. The crucial task was not simply to arrest the suspected, but to force them into a confession. The first to be examined was Tituba, the enslaved woman of Reverend Paris. Initially, she fiercely denied any involvement, but the methods of the examination were relentless, designed not to find truth, but to coerce compliance. Under days of agonizing duress, something broke. Tituba did not merely confess, she offered the interrogators precisely what they desperately needed. She told a chilling, expansive story, drawn from a combination of Puritan fear and pure terror. She claimed to have seen a black man, a book, and the names of Sarah Goods and Sarah Osborne's written there. This was the legal flashpoint. Tituba's confession validated the afflicted girl's claims, provided a concrete narrative of the satanic plot, and established the legal mechanism by which the invisible world would govern the visible one. With Tituba's confession paving the way, the Puritan court committed the single greatest error in the trial's legal history: the widespread acceptance of spectral evidence. Spectral evidence was the testimony of the afflicted persons claiming to see the specter, the spirit or likeness of the accused performing acts of torment. The flaw lay in a fatal theological error: the belief that the devil could not assume the shape of an innocent person. Therefore, if an afflicted person claimed to see the specter of an individual, that individual must be guilty. Under this ruling, physical evidence became irrelevant. An accusation was no longer a claim to be investigated; it had become irrefutable proof of guilt. Fear had found its ultimate, devastating legal weapon. By May of 1692, the crisis required the intervention of the highest colonial office. Governor William Phipps established a special provisional court to handle these capital cases, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, meaning to hear and to determine. This court was an emergency legal body that operated under intense public pressure and the shadow of Chief Justice William Stoughton. He viewed the trials as an existential, holy war. Under his authority, spectral evidence was fully embraced, demanding speed and conviction, not reasoned deliberation. The machinery of death was now officially engaged. The court moved swiftly toward its first official trial. Bridget Bishop, an eccentric nonconformist woman, was the perfect first victim. Her trial cemented the procedures and established the horrifying precedent of a legal execution. On June 10, 1692, Bridget Bishop was found guilty and led to Gallows Hill. She was the first. Her execution sent a clear, chilling message: the legal labyrinth had now claimed its first life. The court of Oyer and Terminer was not seeking justice, it was seeking convictions. By July and August of 1692, the accusations had reached their terrifying zenith, consuming not just the outcasts, but the very pillars of the Puritan community. The courts turned toward Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old matron whose piety was unchallenged, sent a tremor through the colony. Her trial was a crucial test of the court's rigidity versus the community's conscience. She stood firm in her defense: "I can say before my eternal Father I am innocent." The jury initially returned a verdict of not guilty, but the afflicted girls broke into a cacophony of renewed, violent fits. Chief Justice Stoughton, angry and unwilling to accept this challenge, sent the jury back for reconsideration. Pressed by the spectacle of affliction, the jury succumbed. They returned with the crushing verdict: guilty. The execution of Rebecca Nurse on July 19th proved that the court would execute the innocent as readily as the outcast. The reality that emerged created an agonizing legal incentive. Those who refused to confess, who held firm to their innocence, were tried, convicted on spectral evidence, and hanged. But those who confessed to witchcraft were considered to have repented, severed their pact with the devil, and were allowed to live. The system forced an impossible choice: lie and live, or tell the truth and die. Hundreds chose life, fabricating wild stories that, tragically, only expanded the witch hunt further. The most horrific defiance came with the case of Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer. Corey understood that if he pleaded not guilty, he would be convicted, and his property would be seized, leaving his heirs destitute. Corey chose to stand mute, refusing to plead either way. Under the terrible English common law known as peine forte et dure, the court applied crushing pressure to force a plea. Over 2 agonizing days, stones were piled onto his body. Corey endured the torture, his ultimate, final answer to the court being his refusal to submit to its jurisdiction. The ultimate, chilling reply attributed to him was simply, "More weight." Corey's public, excruciating death, the only person in American history to be pressed to death by order of a court, was a spectacle so barbaric and so clearly unjust that it sickened the populace and forced a profound reevaluation of the entire legal process. Corey's death, combined with the execution of the pious and the sheer volume of the accused, which now included the wife of Governor Phipps himself, finally caused the necessary crisis of conscience. Leading Boston ministers, notably Increase Mather, condemned the court's methods. Mather's tract, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, was the definitive intellectual condemnation. Mather's argument was irrefutable. The devil can assume the form of an innocent person, making spectral evidence inherently unreliable and illegal. Governor Phipps, pressured by the intellectual elite, finally moved to shut down the catastrophe. In October 1692, he ordered the court of Oyer and Terminer to stop all further arrests and, critically, to stop admitting spectral evidence. The terrifying legal labyrinth, built on fear and judicial error, had officially collapsed. The crisis ended not with a triumphant victory, but with a massive, collective admission of error. The sheer volume of the accused had forced the colony to confront a terrible truth. They had executed their own citizens based on invisible specters. The human toll of the Salem tragedy was staggering, a stark monument to what happens when fear captures the levers of the law. Over 200 were accused, 19 executed by hanging, 1 by torture, and at least 4 died in jail. For the survivors, the burden was immense. They emerged from jail to ruined lives, seized property, and social ostracization. The community, now awakened to its terrible error, struggled to find a path toward reconciliation. The trial's most enduring legacy lies in their profound, catastrophic impact on American jurisprudence. The wholesale failure of the Oyer and Terminer court served as a visceral, terrifying lesson in the necessity of due process. The core lesson was the rejection of spectral evidence. Future courts would demand tangible, verifiable evidence. This also led to an emphasis on protecting against forced self-incrimination and instilled a deep skepticism of mass hysteria within the legal community. The subsequent decades saw colonial courts solidify requirements for multiple, credible witnesses to an overt act of wrongdoing, effectively barring the return of the evil hand in a court of law. Redemption was slow. In 1711, Massachusetts passed legislation to reverse the attainders of many of the convicted, clearing their names and providing financial restitution. In 2022, the last convicted person, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., was officially exonerated. The Salem Witch Trials stand as a permanent, stark reminder: when fear is validated by authority, and when the legal process sacrifices reason for certainty, the resulting injustice can destroy a community from within. The labyrinth was built by a community obsessed with purity, yet its collapse forged the essential foundations of a more resilient, more skeptical, and ultimately more just American legal tradition.